In 1977, a Japanese fishing crew hauled up a sea monster. They had no explanation. You're on the deck before sunrise, boots sliding on wet metal. When the winch jerks so hard it sounds like the whole ship is about to tear open. The net rises out of the black water in a slow, awful knot of fish, weed, and something far heavier than it should be. Then it rolls. A pale neck. A ruined head. 4 red, limb-like fins hanging loose as if they still remember how to swim. The smell hits a second later. Rot. Salt. Oil. Something ancient and wrong. Nobody speaks at first. Because if you saw this with your own eyes on a fishing boat off New Zealand in 1977, you would think the same thing they thought. This should not exist. In this video, you're going to find out what the Japanese crew of the Zuiyo Maru actually pulled from the sea, why trained experts ended up fighting over the evidence for months, and the one practical decision made on that deck that turned a shocking discovery into a mystery that still refuses to die. And there's one more thing, a small detail in the measurements. Easy to miss, easy to dismiss. That may be the strongest clue in the entire case. By the end of this story, you'll know why some people still call it a sea monster, why others insist the answer is embarrassingly simple, and why neither side has ever managed to bury the argument completely. But first, you need to understand the man standing the closest to it when the net opened, and the deck filled with that smell. His name is Michihiko Yano, a company officer aboard the Zuiyo Maru, a Japanese fishing trawler working the waters east of Christchurch, New Zealand, on April 25, 1977. He isn't the kind of man sailors joke about when they want a ghost story. He's trained, observant, the sort of person people turn to when something unusual comes up in the catch. That matters, because what happens next does not begin as a legend. It begins as a working day on a commercial boat where nobody has time for fantasy. The sea around them is gray and flat under a cold morning light. The crew sees long swells lifting under a dull sky. They hear the metal rattle of the winch and the slap of water against the hull. They feel spray needling through their clothes while the trawl comes in. Nothing supernatural about any of it. Just another haul in another stretch of ocean. And yet there's a decision coming in the next few minutes that will haunt this case for decades. At the time, it feels practical. Later, it will make certainty impossible. The Zuiyo Maru is not out there looking for monsters. It is working. That's the important part. Men on fishing vessels notice everything and romanticize very little. A damaged net means money. Spoiled catch means money. Delays mean money. If something strange comes up, the first instinct is not wonder. It is inconvenience. So when the crew first feels the drag in the trawl, they don't imagine an extinct reptile or some survivor from prehistory. They imagine a snag, a heavy catch, maybe a dead whale piece, maybe some ugly tangle from the deep. Then the winch keeps straining. Then the shape begins to emerge. And Yano, who has spent enough time around marine animals to know the basic grammar of their bodies, realizes that what is hanging in front of him is speaking a language he does not recognize. It is about 10 meters long by the crew's estimate, close to 2 tons. The flesh is decomposing. Parts of the body have opened. Internal organs are gone. But enough remains to form a terrible outline. There is something like a long neck, about 1.5 meters. There are 4 large reddish appendages that look far too much like fins or flippers. There is a tail. The head is small compared to the body. The whole thing looks less like a fish and more like an answer to a question no one wanted to ask in daylight. One image would later circle newspapers across continents. Now here's the thing. Weird stories at sea usually die with the men who tell them. This one didn't, because Yano did what careful people do when they know they may not be believed. He looked, he measured, he sketched, he photographed. Before the captain made the call that would define everything, Yano tried to capture enough of the animal to carry it back to land. And there was something unusual about that morning that none of them fully grasped yet. They were not just looking at a carcass. They were looking at a shape already transformed by time, water, and decay. Little did they know, that would become the center of the argument. The captain, Akira Tanaka, faces a brutal choice. Keep the thing aboard, risk contaminating the catch with the stench of rotting flesh, and lose money, or get what evidence you can and dump it. To people sitting comfortably on shore, the obvious choice is keep it. To men standing in the smell of it, surrounded by tons of fish that pay for the voyage, the obvious choice is something else. What happened next would be reported far beyond the deck where it happened. But before the newspapers, before the professors, before the accusations and headlines and television crews, there is a much smaller moment. Someone on that ship looks again at the body and notices the shape of the fins against the ruined torso. Someone else says it can't be a whale. Another says it doesn't look like any shark he knows. Yano keeps staring at the neck. Then the carcass shifts, not much. Just enough. Enough for the deck to go quiet. Enough for several men to step back at the same time. Enough for the morning to stop feeling ordinary forever. But here's where it gets strange. Because what they found next wasn't what any of them expected. At first, they try to make it normal. That's how these moments usually work. Nobody on a working vessel wants to be the first man to say the impossible thing out loud. So the crew reaches for ordinary explanations and throws them one by one at the body swinging above the deck. A shark, someone says. No, too wrong. A whale calf. No, not with that neck. Some kind of ray, maybe twisted in the net. No, not with that tail. Yano steps closer than the others. Not close enough to touch it with his hands, but close enough to force himself to study the anatomy instead of the shock. The flesh is sloughing. The body is damaged. That much is obvious. But damage should reveal identity, not erase it. This thing seems to do the opposite. The more ruined it is, the more unfamiliar it appears. He sees what looks like a narrow head at the end of a long neck. He sees 4 large appendages that seem placed like limbs. He sees a tail trailing away from the body. And then, he sees the chest cavity opened by decay, making the carcass look as though something has hollowed it out from inside. Tell me you're seeing this. You can imagine one crewman saying, "No answer." Just faces turned up toward the shape. Because what they first think it is, they can still live with. A shark, a whale, something damaged. What they realize it isn't is worse, because it strips away the comfort of recognition. It is not behaving like a familiar carcass. It is not presenting itself in the right silhouette. And what they cannot explain? The long-necked outline, the 4 flipper-like limbs, the overall reptilian impression, lodges in the mind with a force that facts alone cannot easily dislodge. The smell gets worse as it hangs there. That matters. Rotting tissue has a way of changing judgment. It rushes decisions. It shortens patience. It makes everyone want the thing gone. Yano takes photographs anyway. 4 color images. Not many, not enough, but enough to freeze the moment. He sketches. He helps record measurements. A small sample of tissue is kept brown and fibrous, almost whiskery in appearance. It is a tiny piece of a huge question. And there is one detail in the recorded measurements that doesn't sit comfortably with the monster story or the easy dismissal. I'll come back to that. The deck becomes slippery beneath the carcass. Water and decay drip onto metal. A crewman curses and nearly loses his footing. Another pulls back as the body rotates on the gear. The morning air fills with the hot, sickly sweetness of decomposition. The fish already aboard are now part of the problem. Keep this thing too long, and the entire catch may be ruined. So the rational explanation comes back stronger now, not because it makes more sense, but because they need it to. One of the men says it has to be a shark. It has to be. There are large sharks in those waters, big carcasses to stored in the sea. Everything looks monstrous when it comes apart. Yano looks again at the head, at the neck, at the fins. He doesn't argue for a sea monster. He simply can't make the shark answer fit in front of him. That is a more dangerous position to be in. Not belief, uncertainty. Because once you say I don't know, the mind keeps pushing. And then something happened that nobody expected. The body, hanging there above the deck, stopped being just a specimen and became a clock. Every second it remained aboard increased the smell, the risk, and the pressure. Tanaka had to decide. If you're still with me right now, drop it in the comments. And stay with me, because what happened in the next hour changes everything we think we know about this case. The captain orders them to get what they can and get rid of it. That sounds simple now. It did not feel simple then. Because once the order is given, every man on that deck understands 2 things at once. First, they are about to throw away the only complete body anyone will ever have. Second, they may be throwing away proof of the strangest catch of their lives. The carcass is photographed, measured again, Samples taken. Men lean in, then lean back from the stink. Yano tries to memorize the contours. The head, the neck, the appendages, the tail. He will later report what he saw with the seriousness of someone who knows how absurd it sounds. And then the lines shift. The gear creaks. The body swings. No one knows yet that this is only the beginning. Now, you might think that was the end of it. It wasn't, not even close. Because once the carcass goes back into the sea, the mystery doesn't sink with it. It escapes. Yano returns to Japan with the photographs, sketches, measurements, and that small piece of tissue. And when those photographs are shown to his superiors, the reaction is immediate. This is not laughed away as a sailor's tale. Not at first. The company takes it seriously enough to order the Zuiyo Maru, still fishing off the Canterbury coast, to search for the remains again. That alone should tell you how deeply the images disturbed the people who saw them. One practical decision aboard the ship had already turned the case into a wound. Now the photographs begin to press on it. Japanese newspapers seize the story. New Zealand papers follow. Headlines multiply. A dead creature dragged from the sea becomes, depending on who is speaking, a plesiosaur, a sea serpent, a tanawa, a local answer to Loch Ness. That is how fast a mystery changes shape once it leaves the people who were actually there. And here is stage one of the escalation. The witnesses are certain it was not a whale, certain it did not look like an ordinary shark, certain enough that even when others mock the idea, they do not retreat from what they felt on that deck. Their certainty gives the photographs power, and that was only stage one. Stage two arrives when experts start splitting instead of agreeing. This is where it gets complicated. Some scientists and commentators look at the pictures and say the outline is prehistoric. Long neck, small head, limb like fins. The public is primed to see a survivor from another age. That part is easy to understand. The silhouette really does strike the eye in that direction. And if you only glance at the image once, the monster interpretation gets into your head before the details do. But other researchers push back hard. They argue that decomposition can create lies the eye wants to believe. In large sharks, especially basking sharks, the lower jaw and gill structures can fall away. The dorsal and tail fins can degrade. What remains is the spinal column and attached tissue, which can make the body appear long-necked and reptilian. A shark can rot into something that no longer looks like a shark. Remember the smell from the deck? Here's why it matters. That stench was not just atmosphere. It was evidence of advanced decay. And advanced decay is exactly what can turn a familiar marine animal into an alien shape. Close-up anatomy starts disappearing in a specific order. Flesh loosens. Cartilage breaks down. Parts that should identify the animal first are often the parts the sea takes away. That is the false explanation collapsing and reforming in real time. The crew's first rational answer, shark, failed on sight because the body didn't look like one. Later, the scientific shark explanation returns, but only after passing through a second layer of reasoning, not a normal shark, but a decomposing one transformed by the sea itself. And still, not everyone is satisfied, because there is stage 3. A helicopter is sent out to the trawler. Reporters get involved. Television crews search. The story becomes an event. A Japanese reporter, a New Zealand photographer, and a journalist head out to interview the crew. The men who saw the body remain convinced that what they hauled up was not easily dismissed. Media attention doesn't weaken the story, it hardens it. Wait, because what I'm about to tell you next is the part that most people don't know. The part that was kept out of the official reports. The official debate was never really about belief versus disbelief. It was about what kind of evidence survives when the best evidence is gone. No complete body, no full autopsy, no preserved skeleton. Just photographs, sketches, measurements, witness memory, and a tissue sample barely longer than a hand. That is why this case became immortal. And here's the new piece of testimony that keeps the wound open. Yano's own recorded measurements do not neatly flatter the fantasy. In some ways, they cut against it. The proportions, especially the relationship between the neck, tail, fins, and head, are awkward for a classic plesiosaur. That matters because the witness most associated with the mystery may also have handed skeptics one of their strongest arguments. Remember the detail I mentioned earlier? Here's why it matters. The body looked ancient at first glance, but the numbers told a messier story. The tail appeared longer than the neck. The fin placement and relative proportions did not cleanly match known marine reptiles. In fact, to later analysts, they matched a very large basking shark better than the legend did. So why didn't that end it? Because the photos still looked wrong. Because witnesses still sounded sincere. Because once a carcass crosses the line from specimen to symbol, facts have to fight the shape in people's minds. And because the biggest piece of evidence was already gone, back into the sea. That closes the smaller loop, but not the larger one. The decay explains the shape. The measurements complicate the monster claim. Yet the case still refuses to die, because no one can rerun that morning. At this point, the crew believed the worst was over. They started to relax. That was their biggest mistake, because the body was gone, but the image of it was just beginning to live. The climax of this story isn't a beast rising from the deep for a second attack. It is that first hour on deck when too much is happening, too fast, and every choice narrows the future. That is the hour that decides everything. So go back there now. The winch screams, the net jerks, men brace their boots, the thing rises, water pours off it, fish hammer the deck, the stink explodes outward, someone shouts to keep clear, the body swings left. Then right. Its skin is pale gray-brown, torn, soft in places, stringing off in strips. The fins are dark red at the edges. The neck hangs too long, too thin. The head looks ruined but still somehow pointed. The exposed spine curves through the wrecked body like a handle built by the dead. No one wants to be under it. No one wants to touch it. But they have to work around it. The sea knocks the hull. The cables strain again. The metal hook chatters. A crewman slips. Another grabs him. The carcass swings lower. For 1 second, it seems as though the entire weight of it will drop loose and smash across the deck in a flood of rot and bone. You can smell oil from the machinery, salt from the spray, the sweet chemical punch of decaying flesh. Your gloves are wet. Your face is wet. The cold comes through the fabric and the smell goes through everything else. Yano is looking, still looking, trying to force the body into a known category. It won't go. Get the camera, someone says. Quickly. Click. Another photograph. Click. Measure the neck. Measure the body. Take the sample. Move back. The carcass turns just enough to reveal the opened chest cavity, and every man who sees it feels the same drop in the stomach. There are no reassuring details there. No obvious shark head. No clear whale features. Just damage. Emptiness. The body seems not dead enough to be ordinary and not intact enough to be understood. Then, for a moment, everything goes quiet. Not truly quiet. The sea is still there. The engine is still there. But human sound vanishes. No voices. No jokes. No orders. Just the creak of tension in the line and the soft, wet drip of water and decay falling onto steel. That silence is the biggest reveal. Because in silence, the crew stops arguing with the sight in front of them. They stop trying to explain it away. And for one suspended moment, all of them stand inside the same thought. What if this is exactly what it looks like? The captain breaks it. He has to. Throw it back. You can feel the resistance before anyone says a word. Not rebellion, just disbelief. To haul something like this out of the sea and then return it feels wrong on a level deeper than curiosity. It feels like opening a sealed room and choosing not to step inside. But the danger is real now. The catch may spoil. The deck is foul. The body is unstable. The whole ship is built for work, not wonder. And so the order stands. Move it. The line takes weight. The carcass lurches. A fin strikes the rail. Something tears. The smell gets worse. A man covers his mouth. Another turns away. And this is where open loop #2 closes, because the measurement detail finally comes back with force. In the terror of the moment, the outline screams monster. But the proportions recorded in that same moment, the longer tail, the smaller head, the distribution of the fins, would later become part of the case for a decomposed basking shark. The very numbers taken to preserve the mystery also cut holes in it. That does not make the moment less frightening. It makes it more human. Because truth is often cruel like that. What terrifies you in the instant may look different under analysis. Yet analysis can never fully erase what terror felt like when it was hanging above your head. The line swings the body outboard. Sea wind slaps across the deck. The carcass hangs over black water. For a second, it seems impossible that something so huge could vanish so completely. Then it drops. A heavy splash. Foam. Ripples widening. And then it is gone. Just like that. No triumphant ending. No final glimpse of movement below the surface. No proof that it was alive when they found it. No proof that it wasn't exactly what later scientists said it was. Only the memory of the shape, the photographs in Yano's possession, the sample in storage, and the feeling, impossible to quantify, impossible to shake, that something extraordinary had just been thrown back into the Pacific. Can you imagine being in that position? Honestly, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. But the strangest part is what follows once the sea has swallowed the body. Not on the ship, on land. Because mysteries rarely survive on evidence alone. They survive on aftermath. Yano brings the photographs and notes back to Japan. The sample goes to experts. The images spread. What had been a brutal, smelly, practical deckside decision turns into a national sensation. Newspapers print the carcass. Scholars debate it. Some say plesiosaur, some say sea serpent, some say basking shark. The fishing company reportedly takes the photographs seriously enough to want the remains searched for again. By then, of course, the ocean has had all the time it needs. The crew become witnesses to something they can no longer point at, and one practical choice now reveals its full cost. If the complete carcass had been preserved, dissected, and studied in controlled conditions, this story might have been over within weeks. Instead, all anyone has are fragments, and fragments are where legends breed. That is the payoff to the first loop. The biggest mystery in this entire case is not only what they found, it is why certainty was thrown overboard with it. Months later and then years later, the argument continues because both sides possess something real. Believers have the photographs, the eyewitness shock, the long-necked silhouette, the refusal of seasoned fishermen to dismiss what they saw. Skeptics have the tissue sample, the decomposition pattern of basking sharks, and the anatomical proportions that point back toward a mundane, if deeply misleading, answer. Here are the three theories that have held on ever since. The first is the skeptical one. The crew hauled up a badly decomposed carcass, saw an eerie outline in awful conditions, and the press did the rest. In this version, the monster was created by timing, fear, and the human tendency to turn one unsettling image into a mythology. Once newspapers printed the photo and attached prehistoric language to it, the story no longer belonged to anatomy. It belonged to imagination. The second is the scientific one, and it is stronger than many people realize. Basking sharks can reach enormous sizes. As they decompose, the lower jaw and gill arches can fall away, leaving the skull and spinal column to mimic a long neck. The dorsal and tail fins can deteriorate in ways that distort the original shape even further. Later analysis of the tissue sample suggested shark-like material. To many marine experts, that is not a possibility. It is the answer. And yet the third theory refuses to die. Not because it is the most likely, but because the case was never closed with the kind of finality people crave. The third theory says the Zuiyo Maru crew found an unknown large marine animal, perhaps not literally a surviving plesiosaur from deep time, but something not yet recognized by science, or at least not recognized in that form. It feeds on the witness's certainty, on the photograph's strange outline, on the fact that oceans still hide things we do not expect. So which theory survives best under pressure? Probably the basking shark. But here's what nobody talks about enough. One piece of evidence doesn't fit comfortably inside any of the three. It is not just the shape in the photo, it is the gap between image and body. The photographs are vivid enough to provoke, but too limited to settle. The sample is useful enough to guide, but too small to silence. The measurements complicate the monster claim, but do not recreate the complete carcass. Every theory can explain part of the case. None can reassemble the lost whole. That is why the story still breathes, and there's another layer to it. In New Zealand, the story fed into local imagination almost immediately. Newspapers played with the idea of a local Nessie. People linked it to older sea monster traditions and local lore. That matters because mysteries do not enter empty rooms. They arrive in cultures already stocked with symbols. If a long-necked body comes out of the sea, people do not start from zero. They reach for the nearest story large enough to hold it. Some years later, other supposed remains and related rumors along New Zealand coasts helped keep the atmosphere alive, though not always credibly. That only made the original photographs more powerful. Compared to hoaxes, exaggerations, and secondhand tales, the Zuiyo Maru case had one thing most sea monster legends do not. It had a real deck, a real date, real witnesses, real photographs, real samples, and just enough missing evidence to remain dangerous. A trained eye can still look at those photos and say shark. A curious mind can still look at them and hesitate. That hesitation is the mystery. So here's what I want to know. Which theory do you believe? Do you think the Zuiyo Maru crew hauled up a decomposing basking shark that only looked prehistoric because the sea had rearranged it? Do you think the media inflated a grim fishing accident into a monster legend? Or do you think, just maybe, those men brought up something science still does not fully account for? Drop your answer below. I read every single comment. And if you're tempted to laugh the whole thing off, remember the men on that deck did not see a headline first. They saw the body first. They smelled it, measured it, worked around it, feared it. Then they watched it sink. That order matters. Experience came before interpretation. For me, the most haunting detail is still the simplest one. The mystery lived because the carcass was thrown back. That was the sensible decision, maybe even the only decision. And it was also the decision that guaranteed no one would ever get the ending they wanted. The ocean keeps some things by force. This one, it kept by invitation. Next week, I'm covering something that makes this case look like a warm-up. You don't want to miss it.